It was almost dawn, yet sleep remained elusive for Vasper. He lay there, captivated by the sight of Shanti sleeping peacefully, her head nestled on his arm. The serenity on her face, illuminated by the soft light, was a sight he could never tire of. He watched her gentle breathing, knowing how exhausted she was, especially after the countless times he had brought her to the peak of ecstasy. But even now, he could never get enough of her. He couldn't believe he had managed to restrain himself from taking Shanti's virginity, despite the overwhelming desire to claim her as his own. One wrong move and Shanti would lose her power against Alexander Mondragon, the only one she could defeat. His love for her gave him the strength to control himself. The day he could fully have her was the one he longed for the most. He dreamt of growing old with her, but that dream would never come true as long as Alexander was alive. Alexander would hunt them down if he discovered where they were hiding. Shanti stirred slightly, letting out a soft moan, a sound that stirred something deep within him. He tightened his embrace around her, his lips brushing against hers in a tender kiss. Yet, she remained asleep, her soft moan the only response. He smiled, thinking how completely spent she must be from their shared joy. He gently stroked her hair, whispering, "I love you so much, Shanti. What would I do without you? My life would be meaningless without you." His words were murmured against her lips, followed by another lingering kiss. Still, Shanti didn't wake. He chuckled softly. "You're really tired, huh?" he whispered. "Sorry if I overdid it tonight. I missed you so much. Even though we were apart for just a short while, I missed you terribly. I want you by my side always." He continued his tender monologue to the sleeping Shanti, his voice filled with love and longing. His thoughts wandered to his simmering anger towards Prince Raphael. The memory of Raphael's gaze on Shanti at Samara's party made his blood boil. He had barely contained his emotions, especially when Shanti and the prince danced together. The sight of another man touching her was unbearable. He had wanted to punch the prince right then and there but held back, to avoid causing a scene and embarrassing Shanti. But Raphael was pushing his limits, and Vasper didn't know how much longer he could restrain himself. Raphael was bold and aggressive in his pursuit of Shanti, direct in his intentions. Vasper had thought his only rivals for Shanti's affection were Jake and Jacob. Now, Prince Raphael was a new contender. Both Raphael and Samara were straightforward and relentless in pursuing their desires. Vasper was grateful that Samara and her family would be leaving the next day. Out of respect for Samara's parents, he would drive them to the airport the following night. He turned his gaze back to Shanti, his heart swelling with love. "You're indeed dangerously beautiful. I can't blame them for wanting you. But I want you to be mine, Shanti, mine alone," Vasper whispered, his lips brushing against hers once more, eliciting another soft moan from the sleeping Shanti. She shifted slightly, her body now on full display, her black bikini revealing her enticing curves. He gazed at her full breasts, her pinkish nipples tempting him. But he held back, not wanting to wake her. Instead, he gently placed his hand on one of her breasts, feeling its warmth. Shanti stirred, her hand covering his, but she remained asleep. Was this his only joy? Watching the woman he loved sleep? He laughed softly at the transformation in his life. For the first time, he felt genuinely happy and content. For the first time, he experienced jealousy, the fear of losing someone so precious. His past life seemed a distant memory. Before, women were mere playthings, a way to pass the time and seek pleasure. But now, it was different. Shanti was his most precious treasure, someone he couldn't bear to lose. She was the woman he wanted to be the mother of his children. But that dream could only come true if Alexander Mondragon was no longer a threat. Only then could they live a happy life and build the family he dreamed of. He closed his eyes, holding Shanti tightly, willing himself to sleep despite the approaching dawn. Vasper awoke abruptly, noticing Shanti was no longer beside him. A wave of anxiety washed over him as he quickly got out of bed and left the room. The aroma of freshly cooked food greeted him, leading him to the kitchen. There, he saw Shanti cooking, her back turned towards him as she faced the stove. His heart leaped with joy at the sight of her, even in the simple setting of the kitchen. Shanti, with her wet hair cascading down her back, a sign of a recent shower, was stunning in a white shirt and jogger pants. Despite the casual attire, her figure and poise remained captivating. Seeing her cook in his kitchen filled Vasper with an overwhelming sense of happiness, a glimpse of the life he yearned for, Shanti always by his side, in his home, forever. Smiling, Vasper approached her, the delicious aroma of the food she was cooking filling the air. "Hi, Miss Beautiful." "Good morning," he whispered softly, wrapping his arms around her waist and placing a gentle kiss on her neck. Shanti smiled, replying, "Good morning, the food is almost ready." As she spoke, Vasper's arms encircled her from behind. "What kind of coffee would you like?" "I'll make it for you," she asked in a sweet, melodious tone that delighted Vasper's ears. "The same as always, my favorite cappuccino," he replied. "Are you sure? Your favorite? Or are you just copying me?" Shanti asked playfully, smiling, and Vasper couldn't help but grin, caught in the act. "Of course, whatever your favorite is, it's mine too. Ever since I tasted your cappuccino, it's the only coffee I crave, especially when you're the one making it," Vasper said, his hands mischievously wandering to her chest. Neither of them had expected the spark that ignited between them at his touch, their breaths hitching in response. "Okay, just wait a moment," Shanti said as she gently removed Vasper's hands from her bust to move closer to the coffee machine. Vasper followed her every move, his gaze fascinated by her. Before she could reach for the coffee machine, Vasper turned her around and captured her lips in a passionate kiss. "I love you," he murmured between kisses. "I love you too, Vasper," Shanti replied. Vasper continued to kiss her, his lips trailing down her neck, making Shanti giggle softly. "How am I supposed to make coffee like this?" "The food might burn," she said in a quiet voice. Laughing, Vasper stepped back. "Sorry, I got a little distracted." Shanti looked at Vasper, who was only in his boxers. She had been restraining herself, tempted by his perfect, masculine physique. "Aren't you cold? You should change," she suggested with a smile. Vasper, understanding her struggle, returned to the bedroom and came back wearing a bathrobe. Shanti continued making coffee, and when Vasper returned, he asked, "Is there anything I can help with?" "It would make me happy to assist the beautiful woman cooking in our kitchen." Shanti smiled. "Actually, there's not much left to do. I'm almost done." She handed Vasper his cappuccino with a smile, which he accepted gratefully, sipping it with a contented sigh. As Shanti finished cooking, Vasper helped set the table. He watched her with admiration as she plated the food. She took a slice of her dish and fed it to Vasper, who tasted it and exclaimed, "Wow, this is delicious. I'm so lucky to have a wife like you." Shanti laughed, her heart swelling with happiness at his words. She wished it were true, that she could be Vasper's wife, not just his girlfriend. Vasper approached her again, kissing her deeply. "You will be my wife, and the mother of my children," he said in a breathy voice, making Shanti's heart race with joy. "That's exactly what I want too, Vasper. I want you to be the father of my children," she replied in a sultry voice, which made Vasper's heart leap with happiness. Hearing those words from Shanti's lips was like a dream come true. They shared another fervent kiss before finally sitting down to eat. But then Shanti looked seriously into Vasper's eyes. "I think I'm too young to be thinking about marriage and starting a family," she said, feeling a bit shy. Vasper looked at her with understanding and love in his eyes. "I know, that's why the ring I gave you is just a birthday gift, not an engagement ring, even though I wanted it to be. I understand you're still young to be thinking about marriage and family, Shanti, but that's where we're headed, right?" "I can wait until you're ready," Vasper said softly. They kissed again, and Shanti hugged him tightly, remembering she had another question for him. "Vasper, why aren't there any clocks here?" "I have no idea what time it is, whether it's morning or noon," Shanti asked, glancing around the living room and the bedroom, curious. Vasper smiled mischievously. "I did that on purpose. When we're here, I don't want us to worry about time." His playful grin and the way he looked into her eyes made Shanti feel like she was melting. Despite his tousled hair from sleep, Vasper looked incredibly handsome, more so than Jacob or Prince Raphael. She understood why Samara had fallen for him. She herself was madly in love with him. Until they're finished eating. Then Vasper grabbed her hand and looked into her eyes. Go get dressed, we're going to Paris before we head back home. I want to show you our future home when we're married, Vasper said with a smile. Shanta's eyes lit up at his words, and Vasper couldn't help but smile at her reaction. She didn't say anything, but her heart was overflowing with joy and excitement. Vasper had already prepared their future home, just in case they got married. This could be the happiest day of her life. Meanwhile, Jake was at his beach mansion, unable to sleep since they had returned. His anger towards Vasper was boundless. Vasper's possessiveness over Shanti was the cause of their constant clashes. Why should he be affected? It was only natural for Vasper to feel that way about Shanti, but Jake couldn't help the jealousy gnawing at his chest, even though he knew he had no right to feel that way. Jake repeatedly punched a large rock, leaving a deep dent in it since last night when he arrived at the mansion. He missed the days when Shanta stayed at his beach mansion. Due to their work for David, any feelings for Shanti were forbidden unless they left the group. What if he left David's group to pursue Shanti? They had been together with David for many years. They're a family. David would surely be surprised if he decided to leave. But he couldn't endure his feelings for Shanti any longer. No matter how much he tried to suppress them, his feelings only grew stronger. Many nights he had gone without proper sleep, struggling to control his emotions for the woman he loved. That time when he embraced Shanti, he barely managed to hold back his desires. Just a little more, and he would have kissed her. He was grateful he restrained himself. If he continued to suppress his feelings, he might go mad with his love for Shanti. What should he do? He found clarity when he heard Prince Raphael tell Shanta that no one owned her until she was married. It was a sign that fate could still change. If he didn't act on his feelings, he might regret it forever. He would rather face David's anger than let Vasper have Shanti. He only lived once, and if he let this small chance slip, he would regret it for the rest of his life. He believed that he and Shanti could live together if only he was given a chance to show her his true feelings. Jake unleashed a powerful punch on the large rock, his strength and determination sending it flying into the distant sea. He was resolved to change his path, to follow his desires. He would follow no one else's will but his own. Jake looked at his bloodied fist from the impact. He was drenched in sweat and panting from the exertion of venting his emotions on the rock. He teleported back inside his mansion, into the bathroom, and turned the shower to full blast. He stood under the spray with his eyes closed, finalizing his plans. The water cascaded over his naked, muscular body, a sight of strength and resolve. For the first time in his life, he had a clear decision for his future, one that involved the woman he wanted, Shanti. He lingered in the shower, the blood from his hand mixing with the water, flowing down the drain. His mind was filled with images of Shanti, her face playing in slow motion in his thoughts, especially that moment in the car when she sat beside him. Even for just a brief moment, he felt like Shanti was his. Imagining her sitting in the front seat of his car brought him immense joy, a simple dream with a significant impact on his life. After his shower, Jake got dressed and retrieved his bow, the bow David had given him, a symbol of their brotherhood. Returning it to David would signify his departure from the group. But their mission was the same, to protect Shanti. However, David no longer had the right to forbid him from courting Shanti. Jake tied back his long hair and looked into the ocean. With a firm decision, he teleported to David's new mansion in the city. When Jake arrived at the mansion, he saw David and the others busy in the living room. Gabriel, Louis, Marco, Jacob, and Justin were all there, looking grim. "Oh Jake, good timing," David said. "We have a problem." He handed Jake the newspaper. Jake saw the front page dominated by a large picture of Princess Samara kissing Vasper. Below it was an image of Prince Raphael and Shanti dancing. The angle of the photo captured Shanta's beauty smiling, and Raphael's handsome features, making them appear in love. Shanta's laughter, as she gazed into Raphael's eyes, was perfectly timed, suggesting a romantic connection. The headlines were sensational, implying romantic entanglements, Vasper and Samara's kiss, Raphael and Shanta's intimate dance. The prince's hand rested on Shanta's back, perfectly framing her graceful form. The angle of the photo highlighted the elegant arch of her back, the shape of her hips and buttocks, and the slit of her dress that showcased her beautifully sculpted legs. Prince Raphael's gaze was fixed on Shanti, his eyes filled with unmistakable love. Shanta's sweet smile made the scene even more enchanting. It was clear they were the stars of the moment, captivating everyone's attention. Even Jake, looking at the newspaper, felt a surge of admiration for Shanti. The photos were perfect, capturing her beauty and the prince's adoration in a way that was undeniable. David's face was lined with deep concern. "I can't believe the royal family ignored my request to keep Shanti out of the pictures," he muttered, pacing back and forth, clutching the newspaper. "And they even included videos. This is a disaster." Jake stared at the images, anger boiling inside him. He knew what really happened at the venue, but the pictures painted a misleading story. "Prepare yourselves," David ordered. "Alexander Mondragon's men could attack any time. They must have seen the news. This has Leica written all over it." "No wonder she kept her distance from the royal family," David said, his voice rising in frustration. "Look at the inside pages," David continued, showing more pictures of Samara, Vasper, Prince Raphael, and Shanti. The photos showed Raphael wrapping his jacket around Shanti and Vasper dining with Samara. In the pictures of Samara and Vasper dining, Vasper's impossibly handsome face and strikingly attractive presence were evident even while seated. His gaze on Samara highlighted his masculine charm, while Samara's beauty and sophistication as a princess shone brightly. The four of them in the photo looked like a perfect, happy family. Shanta's radiant smile as she looked at Prince Raphael, who gazed back with intense adoration, was captivating. Shanta's golden brown eyes sparkled with apparent affection, making their relationship look like something out of a fairy tale. It was a stark contrast to the complexities of their real lives. Another picture captured a private conversation between Raphael and Shanti on the veranda, looking incredibly romantic. The article also showcased Shanta's red diamond ring, highlighting her elegant fingers adorned with the stunning gem on her fourth finger. An estimated value, reaching over $5 million, was mentioned alongside the image. Beneath, a puzzle was posed. Was this ring from Prince Raphael, who could undoubtedly afford such a treasure, or was there another mystery man behind this lavish gift to Shanta Lorenzo? It was clear that whoever had captured Shanta's heart was of significant social standing. Jake's jaw dropped as he read the newspaper article about Shanti. His teeth clenched in frustration, a reaction noticed by his companions, who exchanged puzzled glances. Why was Jake so affected by what he was reading? His anger seemed different from David's. But Jacob and Justin understood Jake's emotions. Unable to contain his rage, Jake crushed the newspaper in his hands and threw it across the room, shouting in fury. His outburst startled everyone, including David, who stopped pacing. Jake's plans were ruined. Wrong timing, he thought, holding his head in his hands. Jacob stared at the floor, visibly angry but trying to control himself. "Leica is cunning. I'll crush her," Jake shouted, his voice echoing through the room. David, equally furious, but composed, asked, "Jake, can you locate Shanti?" "Lewis, you're a tracker. Find Shanti and Vasper, you and Jake." "David, I've been trying, but I can't locate them," Lewis said, his voice tinged with despair. "Jake, you found them on the island before. Can you do it again?" David asked, desperation in his voice. "Vasper's being cautious, making it impossible to track him," Jake replied, seething with frustration. "I'll deal with Leica," he declared, standing up. "I'll go with you," Jacob said, rising as well, his eyes blazing with anger towards Leica. "No," David commanded. "It's not the right time to confront her. If you go now, you'll only make things worse, and we can't afford to draw more attention. We need to think strategically. Our identity in the outer world must remain protected. I'll handle Leica." Justin, meanwhile, laughed as he read the newspaper aloud. "Destined by fate, beauty, and the prince. What do you think Shanta's reaction will be when she sees this?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Laughing. I'm more interested in Vasper's reaction," Gabriel chimed in, causing Louis and Gabriel to laugh. Raphael's neck might snap from Vasper's jealousy, Marco added. They all looked at each other, incredulous at the day's events. The royal family was supposed to leave that evening, and it was certain they would be pleased with the news, especially Prince Raphael. David continued to wait anxiously for Shanti and Vasper to return, while Jake brooded over his next move. Shanti and Vasper were in Paris, nestled in a valley 2 hours from the city center. They stood on the second floor of a grand chateau, gazing at the sprawling vineyards that stretched before them. Shanti couldn't believe her eyes. The vineyard was more than 3 times the size of her family's vineyard in Santa Luisa. Vasper stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they looked out over the lush expanse. All of this is ours, Vasper whispered in her ear. This chateau. And our own vineyards. What do you think? I hoped you like it. Shanta's mouth fell open as she took in the breathtaking view. She turned to face Vasper, her eyes wide with disbelief. You bought this? It's yours? She asked, her voice trembling with awe. Vasper smiled and nodded. Yes. It's ours. This is where we'll start our family, Shanti, with our future children, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Tears welled up in Shanta's eyes as she gazed into Vasper's. The joy she felt at that moment was overwhelming, as if she were dreaming. Even imagining a future together was enough for her, but seeing Vasper's dedication to making that dream a reality moved her deeply. Tears of happiness streamed down her face. Vasper leaned in and captured her lips in a passionate kiss. They held each other tightly, oblivious to the chaos awaiting them back home. Shanti noticed the many staff members tending to the chateau and the vineyards. They addressed Vasper and her as Your Highness, a title she still found surreal. Whenever they were together, Vasper served her, but here, in his own home, he was a prince served by countless servants. Shanta looked at Vasper's face, unable to believe that this incredible man was hers. It felt like a dream. She wore the same gown she had worn at Samara's event, as Vasper had insisted. He had showered her with compliments before they left their home for the chateau. The intimate moment they had at Samara's event were continued in the privacy of their bedroom. Their chateau bedroom was massive, with a sophisticated and luxurious bed at its center. The carvings were exquisite, making it a true castle. Shanta's eyes roamed the entire room, wondering how grand the rest of the chateau must be. Vasper watched Shanti as she moved gracefully around the room, her every step a dance of elegance. Her eyes traced the intricate carvings on the furniture, appreciating the artistry in each detail. Now, with the room all to themselves, Vasper could focus solely on her, marveling at the breathtaking sight of Shanti in the red dress, from Samara's event. She was stunning, beyond stunning, the most beautiful woman at the event without a doubt. Every movement Shanti made was like a spell cast on Vasper's eyes, holding him captive, never letting him tire of gazing at her. He could scarcely believe that the woman before him was his. It was no wonder that she had captured the heart of the prince. Vasper felt his heart shatter with jealousy when he thought of Prince Raphael, especially the moment when Raphael danced with Shanti and held her close. Yet, the overwhelming happiness he felt watching Shanti now, so radiant and beautiful, was indescribable. She turned to look at him, her smile lighting up her face, her expression filled with admiration and pure joy. Her beauty, magnified by her happiness, was almost too much to bear. Unable to restrain himself any longer, Vasper moved towards Shanti, drawn by an irresistible force. Vasper lifted her and gently placed her on the bed. They sank into its softness, feeling like they were floating on a cloud. Vasper climbed on top of her, his eyes filled with love, longing, and intense desire. Shanti wrapped her arms around his neck, meeting his fervent kisses with equal passion. Their embraces and kisses grew hotter, more intense, as they lay together in the center of the vast room, on the grand bed. They satisfied each other's desires and the deep yearning in their hearts. After their passionate encounter, they lay naked, catching their breath, gazing into each other's eyes, and whispering words of love. I love you, so much, Shanti, Vasper whispered. I love you too, Vasper, Shanti replied, while her hands caressing his cheek. After their intimate moment, they descended to the expansive garden for lunch. The romantic setting of the garden brought back memories of her mother's garden. They enjoyed a special meal prepared just for the two of them. For the first time, Shanti tasted the wine served to them. "You're the only woman I've ever brought here," Vasper said, looking deeply into her eyes. Shanti smiled sweetly, unable to contain her happiness. Vasper couldn't resist and captured her lips again. They finished their lunch joyfully, planning to return to explore the rest of the vast property, as there was still so much to see and do. They finished eating but remained seated, gazing at the vast garden. "Do you want to bring Rhonda here?" Vasper asked, his gaze serious as he looked into Shanta's eyes. Shanta's eyes lit up with excitement as she met his gaze. "Really?" "Yes, Vasper. Rhonda would have so much more space here," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. She missed her horse dearly. "Is it possible to bring Rhonda here with your teleportation power?" Shanti asked, curiosity lacing her words, wondering if Vasper's power could extend to animals. Vasper nodded, a smile playing on his lips as he watched Shanta's joyful expression. Seeing her happy filled his heart with contentment. It felt like a sanctuary of peace and joy whenever he saw her smile. "When we return next time, we'll bring her. We'll plan when to set it up so we can bring Rhonda to the vineyard," Vasper said, and Shanta nodded enthusiastically, her face beaming with excitement. "He's a stallion," Shanta said, smiling. "Oh, we'll bring him here," Vasper corrected himself. Smiling. Vasper's grin widened, enhancing his already striking features, making Shanti unable to resist. She moved closer to him, her lips meeting his in a fervent kiss. Vasper responded with equal passion, his kiss even more intense and his embrace tighter. His lips traveled to her neck, making Shanti giggle at the ticklish sensation. They both laughed, their eyes locking in an intense gaze afterward. "I love you, Vasper," Shanta said in a sultry voice. "I love you more, Shanti," he replied in a low and gentle tone. Without realizing it, Shanti found herself in Vasper's lap, her arms wrapped around his neck as they gazed out at the beautiful garden. "I want to live here and never go back," he whispered, as his arms wrapped tightly around her. Shanta's smile was tender as she read the sincerity in Vasper's eyes. However, they both knew that it wasn't possible yet. They had many responsibilities and missions to complete before their dreams of a peaceful life together could be realized. Shanti gave Vasper a deep kiss, their bodies pressed close together, their kiss filled with love and desire. Until it's time to return to David's home. When they returned, Vasper would take Samara to the airport to pay their respects to the royal family, and Shanti would return to David's house. Vasper, having seen David's house in Shanta's memories, would teleport her there. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, David paced restlessly in the living room with the 6 guardians, anxiously awaiting Shanta's return. The tension among his companions was palpable as they watched David. Suddenly, Shanti and Vasper appeared before them. Shanti had changed into joggers and carried her red dress in her left hand. Everyone was startled, but Vasper was already alert, his arm securely around Shanta's waist. David's face was serious. Vasper noticed the tense expressions on the men's faces, especially David's, which piqued his curiosity. Jake stood up, holding a newspaper in his hand, and approached Shanti and Vasper. Vasper didn't break his stern gaze from Jake. "Read this, Shanti," Jake said in a stern voice, his eyes fixed on them. She took the newspaper and unfolded it. Both she and Vasper looked at it together. Her mouth dropped open, but Vasper's lips remained tightly closed, his forehead furrowed as he stared at the paper. Shanti felt a mix of emotions as she saw the picture of Samara and Vasper kissing. Even though she knew the truth, it still hurt. Another picture showed her and Prince Raphael gazing at each other. She glanced at David. Shanta's face was a mix of anger, shame, and confusion. The serious eyes watching them made her feel exposed. Vasper took the newspaper from her, his hand trembling and cold. Jake's intense gaze was fixed on Shanti, reading her emotions. Vasper remained silent, his face serious, lips tightly pressed together. As they turned the page, Vasper and Shanti saw a large photo of Raphael helping her with his jacket, and another of the 4 of them dining together. The highlighted image of her ring was accompanied by captions that they read together. Shanta's heartbeat quickened. She didn't understand her feelings. Looking at the picture of Vasper and Samara, it still hurt, despite knowing the truth. And the pictures with Raphael were undoubtedly affecting Vasper too. Her eyes almost welled up with tears. She didn't know what to do. She looked at Vasper, who was gripping the newspaper so tightly that veins bulged from his hand and forehead, silent but visibly angry. Meanwhile, David was watching Vasper, observing intently. Vasper abruptly crumpled the newspaper but didn't release it. He glared at David and Jake standing before him. "It's strange there's not even a single picture of your sister in there? Not even in the background? Just the royal family and other guests," David said, looking at Vasper, his tone implying more. Shanti worried there might be another confrontation. She held Vasper's arm tightly, their palms clasped together. She felt the strength of Vasper's grip on her hand. The men exchanged glances, especially at their clasped hands. Marco shook his head while watching them. "Vasper, I requested the royal family's camp not to take any pictures or footage of the vineyard owner, and they agreed. But now? They've openly released footage of Shanti, including the ring. What happens now? This will all reach Alexander Mondragon, and when he sees Shanti with you in the footage, the question remains, why haven't you taken her to the inner world?" David continued. "I sense Laika's involvement in this." David looked at Shanti. "Shanti, it might be best if you don't go with Vasper for now. Stay here with us where we can protect you, and avoid anyone seeing you two together," David suggested, looking into her eyes. Vasper clearly disagreed, stepping forward with a cold expression. "David, when Shanti is with me, I don't take chances. I ensure her safety above all," Vasper replied, their voices controlled but charged with tension. David responded, "I understand your perspective, Vasper, but please, use your head, not your heart, in this situation. What if someone sees you two together, especially now that Shanta's face is public? Do you want to see the consequences?" David emphasized his point. "If you want to see her, meet here at the house. Don't take Shanti anywhere else," he said. Vasper's face hardened. "You're allowed to visit her any time, no one will disturb you," David added. Shanta listened, her mind racing with questions. Vasper moved his hand to her waist, making it clear he disagreed with David's suggestion. Jake and Jacob were visibly angry. Others in the room were taken aback by the scene. Justin and Marco exchanged glances. "Vasper, David's suggestion is for everyone's safety," Jake said, but before he could finish, Vasper pushed him forcefully, surprising everyone, including Shanti. Jake staggered but, being strong, avoided crashing into the glass. Had he hit it, the glass would have shattered from the impact. Jake laughed sarcastically, rage in his eyes as he looked at Vasper. Everyone stood except Jacob. David's sharp gaze at Vasper. Shanti, fearful, held Vasper tightly and looked into his eyes. "Vasper, please, just talk. Please," she pleaded, cupping his face. Vasper's expression softened. "Sorry, but Jakes have no right to decide about you, Shanti. I'll accept it from David, but not from Jake or Jacob. They have no right to tell me when I can take you," Vasper said, looking at her. Jacob gave a bitter laugh, having restrained himself earlier. Gabriel patted Jacob's shoulder. "David, I'll return tonight after taking the royal family to the airport. I'll also visit Laika, but I don't want Jake or Jacob near Shanti," Vasper said bluntly to David, shocking everyone. Jacob stood up, glaring at Vasper, and Jake's eyes burned with anger. Marco and Gabriel held Jacob by the shoulders. Shanti, overwhelmed with emotions, held onto Vasper tightly, ensuring she stayed close to him. "Vasper, can you please not let your jealousy cloud your judgment? The issue here is Shanta's publicity. How do we handle it now that she's been made public? Your father's men will cause chaos in the city to capture her," David said, making his point clear, especially to Vasper. Louis laughed sarcastically. "Vasper, you also need to handle Raphael. If you slip up, You might end up in the newspaper tomorrow. Remember, Raphael is human, not like us. Control your jealousy and use your head, Lewis said bluntly. Love really does make people foolish, Justin interjected, adding salt to the wound. Marco hit him, and David shot him a sharp look. Vasper remained unfazed by their words, his stance and expression unchanged. Shanti worried about how Vasper would deal with Raphael. David interjected once more, Vasper, please understand. Shanta's safety is the priority, and that means making tough decisions. We need to think strategically. Vasper took a deep breath, his eyes still burning with anger but softening slightly as he looked at Shanti. Fine, David. We'll discuss this further tonight. But let me be clear, Shanta's safety is my top priority, and I won't let anyone dictate how I protect her, he said, his voice steady but firm. David nodded, his expression still serious. All right, Vasper. We'll talk tonight. Let's focus on keeping Shanta safe, he agreed. As the tension in the room began to ease, Shanti felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She knew the challenges ahead were far from over, but for now, they had a plan. She squeezed Vasper's hand, and he returned the gesture. David and the rest left them alone in the living room. Vasper held Shanta's hand. I'll be back. I have something to take care of. After I drop Samara off at the airport, I'll return, Vasper said. Shanti nodded. Don't cause any trouble there, okay? Make sure Raphael comes back in one piece, she said, half joking but with genuine concern. Vasper laughed softly. I'll do my best, he replied. What? Do your best. Vasper, make sure you control yourself. If you slip up, it'll be a big news story. I don't want that, Shanta said, full of worry. Okay, don't worry. I won't fight him, Vasper assured her. Now go back to your room. I need to leave. Okay, Shanti replied. They shared a quick kiss, and Vasper smiled before disappearing from her sight. She then walked to her room. Shanti entered her room after Vasper had teleported back to his place. She was exhausted from their trip to the chateau, and the tension from their return to David's mansion had only added to her fatigue. She sat at the foot of her bed, thinking about the newspaper she had seen. She couldn't believe the picture could be so misleading, especially to those unaware of the real events. How had their conversation with the prince been captured in a photo? Was someone following them at that moment? If this was Laika's plan, what did she intend to achieve? Why would she involve her brother in this scheme? Or maybe it's just to pure intentions from the royal family? Shanti opened her palm, and the sword of destiny appeared, but its blade now pulsed with red electricity. She was startled, having seen it blue before. She lifted the sword, feeling its weightlessness. I need blood, a whisper came. Shanti was shocked, hearing the voice clearly. Was that from the sword? She asked herself, her voice trembling. I need blood, the voice repeated. My blood? Shanti asked, hesitant about what the sword demanded. Enemy's blood. I'm hungry, it replied, anticipation in its tone. Like Alexander Mondragon? Shanti asked, waiting for the sword's answer. No. Not him. Not yet. He's not here, but there are others nearby, the sword replied. Nearby? Outside David's house? Shanti asked, her heart racing. Yes, outside. 6 of them. I want their blood. I'm hungry, the sword's voice was eager now. How will I know who they are? How can I identify them? Shanti asked. Suddenly, a screen appeared before Shanti, showing the faces of 4 men and 2 women. Their features shifted, alternating between elfin and human. They were outside the gate of David's house. She saw Samuel stepping out. Samuel, no. Shanta screamed, running out of her room with the sword of destiny in hand. When she got outside, Samuel was not there, and at the gate, none. Gabriel saw her. Shanti, what's wrong? What's the matter? He asked, noticing the sword she was holding. Puzzled. Shanti was restless. There are 4 men and 2 women coming. Do not let them in. They are enemies. Keep Samuel away from the gate, she said urgently, based on what she had seen on the screen. Then she turned and left Gabriel puzzled, staring at the gate. Noted her words. Back in her room, Shanta looked at the sword again. She willed it to disappear from her sight. She undressed and went to the bathroom, taking a warm shower. She soaped and shampooed, but lingered under the water, her thoughts consumed by the newspaper and the vision the sword had shown her. She wrapped her hair in a towel and stepped out, only to find Vasper suddenly appearing in front of her. She was startled, thankful she didn't scream. Before she could speak, Vasper's lips were on hers, his arms wrapping around her tightly. She felt a rush, realizing she was naked in front of him, and both their bodies were burning with desire. "I love you," Vasper whispered between kisses. "Don't worry, we're safe inside my barrier," he reassured her, smiling. Shanti could only smile back as they made their way to the bed, both falling onto it. Vasper hovered above her, her naked body exposed to his hungry gaze. His lips and tongue worshipped every inch of her skin, both of them trying to remain quiet so the guardians wouldn't hear. Vasper's lips and tongue hungrily worshipped Shanta's breasts, while one of his hands trailed down her stomach, moving towards the space between her thighs. Shanta's body arched with pleasure, her voice trapped in her throat as she silently screamed, her mouth open in a voiceless cry. Vasper captured her mouth, seeking her tongue with his fingers playing expertly between her legs. His lips muffled her cries with kisses, and he felt the overwhelming pleasure radiating from her body. Only their ragged breaths could be heard. "Vasper, I'm going crazy," Shanta said between her panting breaths. Vasper responded with a fervent kiss and an aggressive move that intensified her pleasure. Shanta's body writhed on the bed under Vasper's passionate ministrations. His mouth traveled down to the space between her thighs, her legs draped over his shoulders, his hands on her breasts, and her hands gripping his. She bit into a pillow to stifle her moans, her body ablaze with pleasure. Vasper's tongue moved deftly, his pace quickening, driving Shanti to the edge. Her hands moved from the sheets to Vasper's hair, pulling him closer, seeking more of the intense sensation. She reached her climax, her body trembling, her silent screams of ecstasy felt rather than heard. Her hands, which had been tangled in Vasper's hair, fell weakly to her sides as all her strength left her body. Vasper eagerly licked up everything from her, his tongue tracing every bit. Shanta's body trembled with every movement of his tongue, making her laugh softly from the ticklish sensation. Vasper looked up at her with a satisfied smile, taking in the sight before him. Vasper rose, he moved closer, his own breath heavy, his lips finding hers for a passionate kiss, smiling down at her. "Was it good?" he asked in a hushed tone, his mischievous gaze making Shanta's cheeks flush with heat. She was too embarrassed to meet his eyes after their intense session. "I love you," Vasper repeated, his hand still caressing her breast. Shanti, still catching her breath, struggled to suppress her moans. Vasper watched her with an amused expression. "You look so beautiful," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. She smiled faintly, her mind reeling from the sudden intensity. "I just came from our beach house. I haven't been to the mansion yet. I stopped by here for a moment, but I didn't expect to find you like this. Sorry," he said with a teasing grin, making him look even hotter. Shanti tried to hold back her own desires. "I need to go now, but I'll be back after I drop off Samara," he told her, kissing her deeply and squeezing her breast gently. "Don't fight with Raphael, okay? Just once could send him flying," Shanti joked, though she meant it. She knew Vasper could be possessive, and Raphael had no powers. Vasper laughed at her joke. "I can't promise that." "It depends on his attitude," Vasper replied, making Shanti worried. "That's not a good joke, Vasper. I don't want trouble." "Please," she pleaded, looking into his eyes. He smiled at her. "Okay, I promise," he said. "I have to go now," he added, kissing her once more and leaving with a mischievous smile. Shanti lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She chuckled softly, amused by what had just happened. She had to hold back her moans, making it even more challenging. No wonder Vasper found it amusing. The memory of his smile made her giddy, momentarily forgetting her problems. But deep down, she knew she was entranced by the pleasure he gave her. Maybe that's why Samara couldn't forget Vasper? Anger surged within her at the thought, realizing she was creating her own ghosts of jealousy without any reason. She tried to push Samara out of her mind. Vasper's sleek car was entering his massive black gate, and the vehicle that will carry the royal family was already parked, along with the 6 security vehicles that would escort them to the airport. They were heading to the airport where their private plane was waiting to take them back to their country. The security personnel saluted as Vasper's vehicle passed into the garage. Once parked, Vasper quickly got out, greeted by Khalid and 2 female servants. Khalid and the servants bowed their heads in respect. Khalid opened the massive door, and Vasper entered, seeing the royal family's suitcases ready in the living room, where the king and queen were waiting. Vasper bowed to the couple and was greeted warmly in return. The king and queen knew that Vasper had just returned from another country on a business trip, leaving right after Samara's birthday party, and had only now come back. The 3 of them happily chatted in the living room, and Vasper noticed newspapers on the center table featuring pictures of Samara prominently. However, he expertly feigned indifference in front of the couple, his eyes searching for Samara and Raphael. Vasper, when you're not too busy, we hope you can visit our country again, just like before. You've become so busy now that you hardly see Samara anymore, the queen said with a worried expression, but gentle and calm voice. Vasper smiled and nodded in response, and they continued chatting for a bit longer. Vasper then asked Khalid to prepare their dinner. The servants started to organize the last dinner for the royal family at Vasper's mansion. Vasper inquired if their stay at the mansion had been pleasant, and the king and queen responded with positive feedback. He knew the mansion was well equipped with everything the royal family needed. Prince Raphael, already changed into a suit for their journey, descending the stairs from the 2nd floor. He smiled at Vasper and approached him, greeting him warmly, though Vasper harbored resentment towards him. The prince thanked him for his hospitality and for hosting the royal family, and the events concluded peacefully and successfully. Raphael sat opposite them while they waited for the table to be arranged. Vasper had no intention of going up to his room, knowing Samara was there, not wanting another dramatic encounter with her. Khalid called Samara for dinner. The 4 of them casually discussed their country's business matters and other topics. The prince picked up the newspapers, and Vasper observed Raphael's expressions closely. Raphael grinned widely while looking at the pictures of himself and Shanti. Vasper, seething inside, felt a strong urge to punch the prince, but he knew Raphael was just an ordinary person without his kind of power. As Raphael opened to another page, his demeanor turned serious while reading. "Dad, when we get the precious stones next month, reserve the red diamond for me," Raphael said, and his father nodded. "Why, son? Is it for Shanti?" The queen, smiling, asked. "Son, doesn't Shanti already have a boyfriend? And he's no ordinary man. Even though we like her for you, someone else has already claimed her." Raphael smiled back at his mother. "Mom, weren't you about to get married to your first boyfriend in the church when Dad took you away?" "Look, Samara and I are the result," Raphael said with a laugh, joined by everyone except Vasper. This was the first time Vasper had heard the love story of the king and queen. "Yes, son, I was very determined to win your mother. I wasn't afraid to interrupt their church wedding, and despite the chaos, we survived," the king added, looking at the queen with loving eyes and a sweet smile. "That's my motivation, Dad. As long as she's not married, I still have a chance," the prince said, which annoyed Vasper. He pretended to read a magazine, but he was listening intently. "I believe Shanti is destined to be mine," Raphael continued, looking at Vasper. Vasper couldn't tell what his expression was, but Raphael stared as he glanced at him. "It's our destiny to meet, for me to see her and stand with her at the altar as she becomes queen," Raphael said with a serious and stern voice. His parents smiled at his words. Vasper's patience was wearing thin. He stood up and excused himself, noticing the table was set. Khalid approached Vasper with a message. Samara wanted to talk to him in the bedroom. Despite his reluctance, he went upstairs. When he opened the door, he found Samara sitting on the bed, already dressed formally. "Why haven't you come down yet?" "Your parents are waiting, the table is ready," Vasper said calmly. Samara picked up a newspaper from the side table. "Have you seen this?" she asked, approaching him. "Yes, I have," he replied coldly, showing his lack of interest. "What do you think about it?" she asked, trying to gauge his emotions. "Nothing, because it's not true. Those pictures are perfectly timed, but the stories aren't." "Why would you believe what's written on paper?" Vasper replied. "Samara, we both know the truth about our relationship. What more do you want to hear from me? It's over between us, there's nothing left to clarify. Let the papers be, at least they give you good publicity. That's all there is to it," he clarified in front of Samara. Samara's expression turned serious. "Vasper, I couldn't sleep last night thinking about you and what you've done to me." "Why didn't you come home even on our last night?" she asked, her face changing to one of drama as expected. Vasper sighed, looking at her. "Samara, the food's getting cold. Let's go downstairs and eat." "Enough of this," he said, ready to leave the room. As he turned to go, Samara shouted, "Fine. Leave, and I'll cause a scene right here." "I don't care if we don't make it back to our country tonight, Vasper," Samara said, with a piercing look, while Vasper gripping his jaw. "What new drama is this?" Vasper in a cold tone, his brow furrowing as he looked at Samara, speechless. Tears streamed down Samara's face, but she had a handkerchief ready. "You can't just throw me away, Vasper. I'm not like your other women who you can discard when you're done with them," she said. "If you make my life miserable, I'll do the same to you." "If I can't have you, no one else will," Samara shouted, thankful the room was soundproof. "I didn't make your life miserable, Samara. You did that to yourself. Your life was good in your own country, but you came here of your own accord. I didn't bring you here." "It was your decision," said Vasper. Samara's anger flared at Vasper's words. "You are the reason my life is miserable. You came into my life and made me feel special. You made me feel good as a woman. I thought we felt the same way. I thought you were crazy about me too. Before, not a week would go by without you coming to see me, no matter where we were. But since you stopped showing up, I can't stop thinking about you, Vasper. There isn't a day that you're not on my mind. I am so madly in love with you. I thought you felt the same way. But now, you hardly touch me. I miss you so much. I feel like I'm going insane thinking about you. Does my body no longer affect you? I need to know why. How did you change? What caused it? I can't accept losing you, Vasper." Her voice was filled with desperation, her eyes intense and tearful. Vasper could barely think of how to explain to Samara. It was clear to him that Samara was obsessed with him, and it was his fault from the beginning. He was now reaping the consequences of his mistakes. But no matter how much he tried, he could no longer even kiss another woman since Shanti came into his life. He looked at Samara with pity but knew he had to end everything between them. Then Samara's face became fierce and serious, making Vasper realize she meant every word. He finally spoke, his voice stern. "That's just your perspective, Samara. For me, it's over. We're done. Stop clinging to the past that can't be revived," he said sternly, locking eyes with her. "Don't challenge me, Vasper. You can't leave me. You're mine, and you won't be with anyone else," Samara insisted, moving closer and kissing him aggressively, holding him tightly. Vasper pushed her away gently but firmly. "Samara, when did you lose respect for yourself? You're desperate, forcing yourself on me. Please, stop doing that to yourself. A relationship can't survive if only one person wants it. I'm sorry, but I don't feel anything for you anymore. The only thing left is my respect for your parents." "Don't force this," Vasper said, his voice firm. Samara's expression didn't change, but Vasper didn't wait for her response. He left the room quickly and went downstairs. The king and queen were already at the table, waiting for them. Vasper managed to smile at them despite his frustration. Samara came down, putting on an act, smiling at her parents. Vasper watched, impressed by her acting skills as she hid the fact that she had been crying and arguing with him. Samara sat next to Vasper, with the king seating him at the head of the table. Across from them were Raphael and the queen. While eating, their conversation remained casual, but Samara's hand crept up Vasper's thigh. He gives Samara a stern look, but she acted like nothing's happened. The touch made his skin crawl with disgust. Thankfully, the servant standing nearby couldn't see under the table. Vasper tried removing her hand several times, but she kept putting it back. He hurried through his meal, eager to escape. After finishing his food, he excused himself, claiming he needed to get something from his office. Once there, he shut the door, fuming at Samara's stubbornness. He couldn't wait to take them to the airport and be done with the ordeal. As Vasper exited his office, after the royal family had dined and were ready to head to the airport, servants and security personnel busied themselves, loading their luggage into the vehicles. Vasper, despite being invited by the queen to join them, chose to ride in his own car and declined the invitation politely. Once the royal family was settled into their car, Samara stepped out and got into Vasper's vehicle. Though Vasper was displeased with Samara's actions, he had no choice but to drive with her seated in the front passenger seat. Vasper's eyes remained fixed on the road, ignoring Samara beside him. The convoy led by the security vehicles was followed by the royal family's car, with additional security in tow. Vasper, driving at the rear, tried to focus on the road. Vasper, even while driving so simply, you look so hot. I've never seen a man look hotter behind the wheel, Samara purred in a sultry voice, trying to tempt him. Vasper ignored her, not even glancing her way to avoid encouraging her further. Maybe that's why I can't forget you. I've never met anyone like you, she continued, but Vasper let her words slide past his other ear. Vasper, I can't let anyone else have you, Samara said bluntly. Vasper chuckled bitterly, unable to believe what he was hearing. Samara, I am not yours to own, Vasper replied sternly, still not looking at her. And I don't regret that you were my first. You will always be my best experience, she said dreamily, making Vasper increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Samara, if you can't stop talking about the past, please, don't bring it up again. How will you move on if that's all you think about, he said. Vasper, I have no intention of moving on. I won't accept that we are breaking up, Samara replied, her tone serious. Vasper could only shake his head, keeping his eyes on the road. Despite Samara's persistent flirtations, her hands constantly on his thigh. Samara, I'm driving, Vasper said in a serious tone. Samara looked at him, smiling sweetly. Why, Vasper? Can't you concentrate? We're driving slowly anyway. Besides, didn't we do much more than this in the car before? Samara reminisced. I can't believe it now feels like a dream. Can't we go back to what we had, Vasper? Can't we? Samara, please, don't add to your pain. The more we talk, the more it will hurt you. You won't accept what I have to say. Please, move on, Vasper's voice was stern, his eyes never leaving the road. Samara began to cry again. Why are you so cold to me now, Vasper? I miss the old you, Samara said, pouting like a child. But when I come back next week, I'll be with Raphael. I won't accept your decision, Vasper. I can't bear to lose you. She cried harder, her sobs filling the car. Vasper felt like he was talking to a child who didn't understand. Samara was stubborn. You were my first, Vasper. You're the only man in my life. I can't live without you. I can't bear the thought of another woman taking you away, she said tearfully. Vasper glanced at her, gauging her last statement. Is it another woman that's keeping you from me? Samara asked, her tone suddenly serious. If it is, I won't forgive her. I was the first, you should be with me. She's a thief, and I won't forgive her, she threatened, her eyes fixed on the road. Vasper forced himself to stay with the royal convoy, determined not to let Samara's threats pass unnoticed, knowing she could be dangerous to Shanti. Samara, my decision is final. Nothing will change it. I can't be your husband, we don't have a formal relationship. What we had was just a game. Did you ever hear me say I love you? No, right? It was just mutual understanding. We enjoyed the physical touch, but there was no emotional attachment for me. Vasper's words cut deep, intensifying Samara's heartbreak. Her sobs grew louder. Why are you like this while other men would do anything for my attention? Samara cried, her voice breaking. They were nearing the airport. Get yourself together, Samara, Vasper said firmly. I don't care. Samara yelled back. As they arrived at the airport and parked, Samara immediately leaned over and kissed Vasper passionately, despite his lack of response. He was pinned against his seat, unable to move as Samara clung to him. Enough, Vasper said, trying to gently push her away, careful not to hurt her despite his strength. I miss you. I will miss you so much, Vasper, Samara whispered between kisses. Vasper finally managed to pull her off and back into her seat. He quickly got out of the car to prevent her from trying again, opening her door, as a gentleman despite everything. As Samara stepped out, she pretended to be fine, smoothing her disheveled clothes. Her family waited ahead, but she turned back, kissed Vasper once more, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Vasper found himself helpless under the watchful eyes of onlookers. Discreetly, he grasped Samara's waist and gently pushed her away, making sure it wasn't obvious. Samara, enough, he hissed between his teeth. Samara heard him and smiled. I love you, Vasper, she whispered before turning away to join her family. Her parents waved at Vasper as they headed towards their private plane. Noticing the press scattered around, Vasper hurried back to his car and sped away, frustrated. The photographers captured his car as he drove off. Anger bubbled within him as he pondered why the press was present at what should have been a private departure for the royal family on their private plane. Who had allowed them inside? Determined and angry, he drove straight towards Laika's mansion. As Vasper's car stormed through the gates of Laika's mansion, its tires screeched, announcing the driver's fury. Inside, Laika awaited in the living room, already anticipating her brother's explosive entrance. She knew his temper well. The elves, sensing the intense negative energy emanating from Vasper, silently vacated the room, leaving Laika alone. No one dared to greet Vasper. He didn't bother parking properly. Instead, he teleported directly into the living room, where Laika lounged like a queen on her throne. A bottle of wine and a glass sat before her, her demeanor calm and smiling. In stark contrast, Vasper's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. The large flat-screen TV in front of Laika displayed live coverage of the royal family's departure. Vasper's eyes blazed as he saw the live feed. Why is this live? It was supposed to be private, no press allowed, he shouted, his voice trembling with fury. He knew Laika was behind this. Laika laughed, a sound that grated on Vasper's nerves. Why keep it private when they paid a fortune for the coverage, Vasper? The royal family didn't want to refuse such a high payment. Plus, it's favorable for Samara. You two looked so sweet together live. You're famous now, the royal couple, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. Vasper's fists clenched at his sides. You orchestrated this, Laika. Even Shanta's face was included in the footage. David specifically told the royal camp not to release her photos or videos, yet they ignored the agreement, or it's you. Laika's laughter only grew. What do I have to do with it, Vasper? The royal family's camp controlled the coverage, not me. You're creating ghosts for yourself. You and David, always so paranoid about protecting Shanti. No matter what you do, she's destined for Alexander Mondragon. They must be looking for her by now. Since she's in your custody, you should deliver her to Alexander yourself, right? They know she's with you now, she said, her tone sharp and condescending. Vasper struggled to rein in his temper, trying to think clearly. Vasper, be careful. Everyone knows Samara is your girlfriend. If someone sees you with Shanti, you know what will happen, right? The innocent, beautiful lady who steals the princess's boyfriend. Laika laughed louder. Won't that be an exciting scene? You know Samara won't back down, she won't let anyone take what's hers, she taunted. Enraged, Vasper stepped forward, jabbing a finger at Laika. Laika, he began, but Laika slapped his hand away and struck him hard. Don't you dare point your finger at me in my own home. Laika yelled, her hands igniting with flames. The fire spread to her hair, dancing at the tips without burning her clothes. Vasper clutched his cheek, the burn from Laika's slap searing painfully. If you think you're the heir to the Mondragon legacy, you're far from it, Vasper. Don't get comfortable, everything can still change. Here in the outer world, I'm in charge, not you. Laika's voice was fierce. How do you think Alexander would feel knowing his heir wants to take his elixir? She sneered, the flames gradually receding from her hands. One warning, Laika, if Shanti gets caught in your schemes and is put in danger, I won't hesitate to fight you. We are not family. From the beginning, you've never treated me as family because of your grudge against my mother. Remember that, Vasper said, his voice and gaze stern, dangerous. Laika's expression soured as Vasper mentioned his mother. Don't bring your mother into this, Vasper. It only makes me angrier because of what she did to mine, who died with a broken heart, a usurper, Laika spat out, her smile tinged with disgust. And now, you're doing the same? Stealing what isn't yours. Is this your true love, Vasper? When I saw Shanti, I sensed her presence. She became stronger. She has the sword of destiny? Doesn't she? Does that mean she's still a virgin? Laika's laughter rang out, maddening and loud. You? Preserving a girl's virginity? And rejecting someone like Samara. Samara practically threw herself at you, yet you turned her down, a huge insult to her ego. All because of your love for Shanti? Laika's laughter grew louder, more mocking. From having 2 women in your bed before, and now, preserving Shanti's virginity and refusing Samara's beauty? All because of love? Really? She taunted, shaking her head in disbelief. Vasper finally realized just how deeply Laika had infiltrated his life. She knew everything, even the most private details of his life. There were no secrets from her. They locked eyes, neither willing to back down. Let's see how strong your love really is, Vasper, Laika said theatrically, laughing sarcastically. Imagine. Vasper Mondragon, in love. Since when did you start rejecting women? You even turned down Samara, really? She's a high-caliber woman. Always in the list of most beautiful women in the world. And a princess. Her laughter was loud and mocking. What an insult. Yet she's crazy over you. An epic twist of events. Still laughing. Their confrontation paused as the TV replayed the scene of Samara and Vasper. The footage showed Vasper's car arriving, with cameras positioned at the front and side. It captured Samara climbing onto Vasper in the driver's seat, kissing him, with her back clearly showing like embrace. Vasper fumed at the sight. If you didn't know the truth, you'd believe what you saw. However, it didn't show him pushing Samara back into her seat. The next scene showed Vasper getting out of the car, opening Samara's door, and Samara hugging him, smiling, as he held her waist, seemingly reciprocating her kiss. In reality, he had been pushing her away. Laika grinned widely, watching the broadcast. I wonder if Shanti saw this. How do you think she feels right now? Laika said, her voice low, deliberately taunting Vasper. Without warning, Vasper grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it against the TV. Laika stood agape, staring at her broken television. Unsatisfied, Vasper ripped the TV off its stand and hurled it to the floor, shattering it further. He then smashed Laika's wine glass, the pieces scattering. Laika watched Vasper's furious face, seeing a rage she had never witnessed before. She remained silent, aware that any further provocation might cause her mansion to burn down around her. Vasper glared at her with intense hatred, their eyes locked in a painful stare. Vasper punched Laika's center table, shattering it with a powerful blow. The impact sent shards flying, some hitting Laika. She closed her eyes, restraining her emotions, her body trembling with suppressed anger, determined not to unleash her flames. Vasper vanished from her sight. As soon as he was gone, Laika called for Shalik, the head servant, and the elves quickly cleaned up Vasper's mess. Laika retreated to her room, running to the shower. She turned on the water to the coldest temperature and stood under it, steam rising from her overheated body. The bathroom filled with smoke as she tried to cool down, desperate to return her body temperature to normal. Meanwhile, at David's mansion, all 7 guardians were gathered in the living room, except for Shanti. They had just watched the live coverage of the royal family's departure. The silence in the room was deafening, and no one dared to speak. They exchanged heavy glances, especially Jake and Jacob, knowing the impact of the coverage on Shanti. Jake was twisting his neck, staring into the distance with a tight-lipped expression. Wow. Justin broke the silence. They want the public to believe that Samara is Vasper's girlfriend? The royal couple? He continued, mimicking Vasper's TV appearance. Based on what we saw, if there's no foul play, they do look like a couple, right? Jacob suddenly yelled, "They are a couple, Justin." What do you mean, look like a couple? They are together. That's why Samara came here, to be with her boyfriend. His blue eyes blazed with intensity. Jacob. Relax. You're angry? Of course, I'll side with our Shanti. Shanti is the girlfriend, not Samara. Samara is the past. So who should be the girlfriend? The first or the last? Justin questioned, shaking his head in frustration, but no one answered him. The truth is, Vasper strung both along. He overlapped their relationships. He started with Shanti before ending things with Samara. That's why their paths have crossed now. Jake stated angrily, his voice filled with disgust at Vasper's womanizing. But you can't say he strung both along, Jake. Shanti is still a virgin. Marco responded, causing everyone to argue again. Gabriel and Louis laughed, while David and the others were irritated by Marco's attempt at humor during a serious discussion. David stared at the TV, deep in thought. I feel sorry for Shanti, being portrayed as Vasper's mistress. A mistress is hidden, but a wife is public knowledge, Louis commented, causing more arguments. Suddenly, Jake stood up as he noticed Shanti in the hallway, listening to their conversation. Everyone turned to look at her, standing silently. Have you been there long, Shanti? Jake asked, his voice uncertain. Shanti's face was cold, and they all awaited her response. Suddenly, Vasper appeared before them, his hair wet, as if he had just showered, but his black t-shirt and tight leather pants were only partly damp. Everyone fell silent, watching intently. Vasper saw Shanti, and their eyes met before she turned and hurried back to her room. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew a small misstep could lead to chaos. Vasper vanished, presumably following Shanti to her room. David sighed deeply, bastard. Why did he date 2 women at once? Now we're caught up in his mess. Did Shanti hear our conversation? Marco asked, his smile fading. It's better if she did. She needs to understand the mess she's in. Her relationship with Vasper is more tangled than a vine, Louis added. David. What's our mission here, watching over Vasper's love life? I'm tired of this drama. Can I go home? I have a girlfriend waiting, Gabriel said irritably, prompting laughter from the others except David, Jake, and Jacob. All the single guys stay, but I have a girlfriend too. Only one, though, Gabriel added, laughing, causing Jacob to punch him playfully. Jake remained silent, listening for any noise from Shanti's room. Hearing nothing, he suspected Vasper had taken Shanti elsewhere. He wanted to intervene but knew it would only cause him more pain. He could see Shanti's strong feelings for Vasper. What about you, David? Can I go home? Call me if you need me back, Gabriel insisted. David disagreed, Gabriel. Now is when we need to be on high alert. Alexander's men will likely come looking for Shanti, especially now that she's public. We need to stay vigilant. Gabriel sighed. You guys don't have girlfriends, so you don't get it. You don't miss anyone, he complained, making Louis, Justin, and Marco laugh again. David, Jake, and Jacob didn't join in the laughter. Jake walked away to his room, frustrated that his plans were disrupted by recent events. The others watched him leave without a word. Another one bites the dust, Justin remarked, nodding towards Jake. Jake heard but ignored him. They're just as unlucky as Jacob, both having feelings for Shanti. What a curse, Justin continued, laughing. Jacob glared at Justin, his smile forced. It's true, though. They're unlucky to have fallen for Shanti. Their love lives are cursed, he thought. David remained silent, avoiding comments about his colleagues' private lives. If I find someone I like, I'll marry her right away to avoid all this drama, Marco said. Look at Shanti. What will Raphael do when he returns? Another unlucky guy, handsome but cursed with women, he added, laughing. Marco, it's best if you keep quiet now, David said, walking to his room. No problem with Raphael. If Vasper gets tangled up, he'll be sent back to his realm instantly. No need for a plane, Justin replied, causing more laughter. Jacob stood up and left the group, tired of their jokes. Finally, the unlucky ones are gone. Only the lucky ones remain, Justin said, laughing as Jacob flipped him off. The four left, Marco, Justin, Louis, and Gabriel, grabbed some whiskey and drank while talking. The room was noisy, despite only the four of them being there. Meanwhile, Shanti was crying on the bed. She had been teleported to Island Beach by Vasper. She buried her face in the pillow, deeply affected by what she had overheard in the conversation between the 7 guardians in the living room. This was not even considering what she had seen on TV. The pain in her chest, the jealousy that gnawed at her, was overwhelming. She didn't want to see Vasper, she was hurt, and filled with jealousy. Vasper, on the other hand, was in the living room, just listening to Shanta's cries. He didn't know what to do, he felt helpless. He wanted to explain that what she saw on TV was different from what really happened, but Shanti wasn't willing to listen to any explanations. Vasper's chest tightened as he listened to her sobs. The sound of her crying was like a dagger to his heart, blaming himself for everything and wondering why his life had become so complicated. He hadn't realized how obsessed Samara was with him. And now, the complexity of his life was weighing him down. Leaning against the living room wall, Vasper checked the time. It was already past 11 p.m. Since they had arrived on the island, Shanti had refused to let him touch her, refused to even look at him, didn't want to hear his voice. Minutes passed. Vasper got up when the room finally quieted down, carefully listening for any sound. Shanti had stopped crying. Vasper was anxious about what to do next. Could they talk now? Should he call out to her? He waited for a few minutes, then heard the shower running. Was Shanti taking a shower in the middle of the night? Vasper looked at himself in the mirror. His clothes had dried. Earlier, after leaving Laika's mansion, he had dived into the sea to release his anger. He had just put his clothes back on without bothering to dry off. Then teleported back to David's mansion, only to find Shanta's mad at him. The shower continued to run for several minutes, and he could hear her crying again. Vasper let out a deep sigh. Shanti, I'm so sorry. That's not what you saw on TV, he whispered to himself, imagining Shanti in front of him. When the car stopped, I didn't do anything. It was Samara who suddenly clung to me. But I pushed her back into her seat. They didn't show that part on TV. When we got out, I couldn't do anything because there were so many people watching us. But I didn't hug her, I just pushed her away gently, so no one would notice. Don't believe what you saw on TV, it wasn't true. Please stop crying, it hurts me to hear you like this, Vasper said in a hushed tone. He laid down on the sofa, whispering, I love you so much, Shanti. There's no reason for you to be jealous of Samara. I have no feelings for her, none. You're the only one in my heart, the only one on my mind. His breath shuddered as he sighed deeply. The room went quiet again, and he heard the sound of the hairdryer. He stood up once more, staring at the door to the bedroom. Should he go in? Was it time to talk? Minutes passed, and the hairdryer turned off. He was sweating, anxiety building as he checked the clock, past midnight now. The room was silent, but he was still on edge. He waited for 30 more minutes later. He made up his mind and teleported into the bedroom. When he entered, Shanti was lying on the bed, already asleep, facing away from him. But her posture, it tortured him. She wore a seductive nightie that clung to her curves, the delicate fabric offering little cover. A bit of her black panties visible at the curve of her hips, her beautifully shaped legs exposed, without a blanket. Her hair was spread out over the pillow, and the sight of her, so beautiful and so tantalizing, was a torture Vasper hadn't been prepared for. He becomes restless, can't take his eyes away from her. Vasper's heartbeat quickened as he gazed at her, moving slowly towards the bed to see if she was really asleep. He was mesmerized by her sleeping face. His eyes fixated. Seems like the time had stopped at that moment. He stood there, just staring. The urge to kiss and hold her was overwhelming, but he held himself back, knowing he had no permission to act on these desires. Still, the sweat dripped down his temples, as the heat in his body intensified. He removed his shirt, trying to cool down. He glanced at the bed, wondering if he could lie down next to her, just to lie beside her. His eyes traced the lines of her body, and her entire figure. He tried to control his intense desire, and it was almost unbearable. "Control yourself, Vasper," he murmured to himself. Shanti was deeply asleep, clearly exhausted from crying. He wanted to hold her, kiss her, bathe her with kisses, and embrace her tightly. But he felt guilty and didn't want to upset her again. For the first time, he felt scared of making her mad. "Shanti, you look so hot," he whispered to himself, shocked by his own words. He bit his lower lip, watching her on the bed. She stirred slightly, letting out a soft moan that tortured his entire being even more. She turned to face the other side, causing her nightie to ride up, exposing her entire lower body, with only her panties covering her butt. Vasper's mouth dropped open, staring at the overwhelming temptation before him. His body seems on fire, the desire to take her was almost unbearable. Her curves were etched in his mind, a sight that was pure torment for him. Could he just lie down beside her? He slowly sat down on the bed, careful not to touch her, and he removed his pants. He paused for a moment. Why would he remove his pants? Ignoring his mischievous thought, he's now naked, leaving only his briefs. But his eyes never left Shanti. "Control yourself, Vasper," he whispered to himself repeatedly. He was now sitting beside her, who had her back to him. His eyes were fixed on her perfect body. "You're mine," he murmured. "Shanti, you belong to me. I won't let anyone take you away," he said to himself. He gazed at her neck, wanting so badly to kiss it, to kiss her shoulder. He leaned in closer, carefully peeking at Shanta's face. She was deeply asleep, and he felt like he couldn't hold back any longer. He moved his lips closer to her shoulder and kissed it softly, gently. The warmth of his lips caused Shanti to move, turning to face him, and Vasper panicked, his heartbeat racing. What if she got angry for finding him beside her? His panic intensified as he looked at her face, the urge to kiss her lips growing even stronger. Shanta's lips were slightly parted, inviting a kiss. "Shanti, you're driving me insane. Can I kiss you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Please. I'm sorry if I kiss you now, but I can't control myself anymore," he murmured. He leaned in and gently captured her lips, careful not to wake her. "I love you so much," he whispered softly, against her lips. But as he pulled away, Shanta's eyes opened. Their gazes locked, Vasper's heart pounding wildly in his chest. He'd been caught stealing a kiss. They stared at each other in silence. "I'm sorry, please don't be mad," he pleaded softly. "But I can't stand it anymore, just watching you. It's driving me insane." Shanta didn't respond, just kept staring at him. She opened her mouth, but no words comes out. His eyes shifted to her parted lips. Waiting for the words to come out, but the urge to kiss it, he kept fighting inside him. Vasper watched her intently, his heart still racing, waiting for her reaction. But his heart didn't calm down. Finally, Shanta lay back down, closing her eyes again. Vasper smiled, taking it as a sign that it was okay to lie beside her. But the heat in his body only intensified as she settled back, her posture almost too much for him to bear. It was like his body was on wildfires. The sight of her lips, he couldn't resist. He felt drawn to her lips again, leaning in to kiss her. At first, it was soft, but the softness of her lips left him wanting more. He kissed her passionately, filled with longing, unable to stop. He didn't care anymore if she got mad at him. "Shanti, I love you," he said against her lips. This time, Shanti was fully awake. She opened her lips, allowing Vasper's tongue to explore her mouth. Shanti responded to Vasper's kisses. She wrapped her arms around his neck. That made him smile, his heart leaped with joy, and he pulled up. When he looked into her eyes, his face was filled with love and desire, as if he were intoxicated by her. Vasper pulled Shanta's body closer to him. That elicited a deep moan from him, feeling the heat of her body. His body trembling with desire. He whispered her name in a deep groan. As they continued kissing fervently, the heat between them growing. He removed Shanta's nightie, revealing her body. Vasper's hands caressed every inch of her, while his lips were hungry for her breasts. His mouth and tongue moved desperately in need. Shanta's moans echoed throughout the house, mixing with the sound of the waves on the shore. She's gasping for air, as the sensation of pleasure grows even stronger, chasing the sensations that burned inside her. Grasping Vasper's hair as he reached in between her thighs. As he removed her underwear, the warmth of his breath and tongue against her skin, and the movement of his tongue drives her insane. Her body arched in bed. She raised her head to see Vasper. And he glanced at her with a playful smile, and continued his ministration again. His hands on her breasts, and she grasped it. She's almost there, chasing it. Her moan became louder. Until she reached her climax, that elicited her a deep moan. Vasper continued tasting her, until she completely spent. Her arms dropped at her side. With open mouth and ragged breathing, Vasper rose and captured her mouth for a passionate kiss. Shanta's hand caressing his cheek while kissing, "I love you, Shanti," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too, Vasper," she replied, whispering. Her voice sounds like a siren in Vasper's ear. Vasper on top of her. He pressed his body against her, though they can't go deeper to protect her virginity. Their body trembling from desperate restraints. Especially Vasper. She felt his desires, it's so hard, pressing against her. Their fervent kiss grew even stronger when Shanta's hand crept inside his underwear. They both gasped for air. And caused Vasper to groan deeper. He bit Shanta's lip gently. Shanta's desires for him is evident. She overturned Vasper, now she's on top of him, straddled on him. She's a tantalizing figure on top of him. Vasper eyes seems hypnotized looking at her. Her beauty is intoxicating. His eyes roamed over her body. His hands on both of her breasts. Shanta leaned on and captured his mouth for another fervent kiss, while Vasper's arms embracing her tightly, and Shanta's lips moved downwards. Vasper's muscles tensed as her mouth reaching in between his thighs. Shanti removed his underwear and leaned on, Shanta's mouth hot against his sensitive skin. Her tongue playfully playing on it, that brought Vasper's mind into frenzy. The sensations like an electric that caused his body trembling with overwhelming sensations and his desperately chasing it. Vasper's elbows digging into the mattress, eyes locked on Shanti as she worked her magic on him. Shanta's gaze was intense, filled with desire, holding his as her lips and mouth skillfully explored him. His right hand gripped her hair, ensuring nothing would obstruct his view. Her tongue moved expertly, and he felt his mind and body spiraling into madness, the sight of her driving him wild. Unable to hold back, his mind spiraled as pleasure coursed through him, his body teetering on the brink. He couldn't take it anymore. With a groan of desperation, Vasper pulled Shanti up to capture her lips in a hungry, desperate kiss, his need for her overwhelming. She responded with equal fervor, all the while keeping her hand in motion, stroking him with a quick, steady rhythm. He could feel the urgency in her touch as her hand continued its relentless pace, stroking him with a rhythm that made his breath hitch. Their lips remained sealed in a passionate kiss as Vasper's groans deepened, his grip on her body tightening with every passing second. He was on the brink, and Shanti knew it. Feeling it. Just as Vasper was about to lose himself completely, sensing his impending release, she pulled away from his embrace, a look of determination in her eyes. She wanted to taste him, to feel him fully, to push him over the edge. Her mouth moved over him with an urgency that made his groans louder, deeper, his heart pounding in his chest, and made his entire body tremble. His hands tangled in her hair as she brought him to the edge, pushing him into a state of pure ecstasy. Vasper's body tensed, and with a final, guttural groan, he reached the peak of his pleasure. Vasper's world shattered as he climaxed, his body shuddering uncontrollably, while his eyes on her, with open mouth gasping for air. Shanti didn't stop, not until she had taken everything he had to give. She swallowed every drop, her tongue savoring each one, her tongue lingering over his skin as if savoring each moment. While Vasper watched in awe, completely mesmerized and intoxicated by her presence, he was utterly drained, every ounce of his strength gone, but his love for her only deepened. When Shanti finally moved closer, Vasper immediately pulled her into his arms, capturing her mouth in a passionate, almost desperate kiss. "You drive me insane," he murmured against her lips, his voice thick with desire and adoration. Shanti's response was a soft, breathless moan, her body trembling with desire. "I'm crazy over you," he added, his words a promise of everything he felt. Their kiss seeming endless, a feverish connection that neither wanted to break. They both collapsed onto the bed, their bodies spent but their hearts still racing. They knew they had reached a new depth of intimacy, one that bound them together even more tightly than before. They shared their passion multiple times, and Shanti brought Vasper to the edge of pleasure over and over again. They lay naked, holding each other on the bed. Shanti eventually fell back asleep, but Vasper couldn't. He just kept watching her, kissing her lips even while she slept, whispering "I love you" repeatedly. Vasper's happiness at that moment knew no bounds, relieved that Shanti was no longer angry with him. He smiled, looking at her, their fight seemingly fueling the intensity of their love for each other. Their kisses were more fervent, their passion for each other more intense. One thing was certain for Vasper: he's madly in love with her, and yes, obsessed with her as others called it, and he couldn't bear Shanti being mad at him or upset with him. He hugged her tightly, kissed her lips deeply, and finally closed his eyes, knowing Shanti needed to sleep in his arms.